Welcome, everybody. Good evening. I'm Julie Moody Freeman, the director of the Center for Black Diaspora and an associate professor in the Department of African and Black Diaspora Studies. We're going to get started in a minute. I just wanted to let you know that this event is being recorded. So just for your privacy, if you would prefer not to be on camera, feel free to go off screen. We'll make sure that you're protected in the best way we can. And at the end, if you're asking questions and prefer not to be on camera, we will pause for you. All right. So I would like to welcome Reverend Angel Kyodo Williams. Thanks so much, Reverend Angel, for agreeing to join us. And thank you all for attending. I'm so happy that you have joined us. My job is to just simply thank everybody. So I would first like to thank my colleagues who are part of the Healing Justice Dialogue series. This event was co-organized by myself at the Center for Black Diaspora, and Rusa, the director of the Women's Center, helped. Maria Ferrara, the director of the Center for Community Health Equity, and Susana Martinez, the director of Peace, Justice, and Conflict Studies. We also had some wonderful co-sponsors, African and Black Diaspora Studies, American Studies, Critical Ethnic Studies, the MA program, International Studies, the Center for Religion, Culture, and Community, Social Work, Sociology, and Women's and Gender Studies. Thanks also to the following individuals who helped before this event and are helping during this event, and I want to name them for you. Jewel Daly. Thanks to Jewel Daly, the Assistant Director of the Center for Black Diaspora. Thanks also to Catherine Douglas, Jessica Williams, Jennifer Ugumiki, Belinda Andrade, Haley Curtis, Amalia Salmeron, Nina Williams. Excuse me, Nina Wilson. Just a quick outline of the program for viewers. The program will end at 7 p.m. We have a short time with Reverend Angel, precious time. And so I will shut my mouth in a minute and just very quickly put your questions in the chat throughout the event. And we will do our best to accommodate your questions within the allotted time that we have. I would quickly like to turn you over now to Dr. Beth Cathlet, who is the Associate Professor of Women's and Gender Studies and the Director of the Faculty Scholarship Collaborative, who will now introduce Reverend Angel.
Hello. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. It is a true delight for me to welcome Reverend Angel Kyodo Williams to DePaul and to have the opportunity to introduce her to our community. I'm going to say just a couple personal words. I first encountered Reverend Angel's work many years ago when she spoke at a conference about spirituality and social justice at the University of Chicago. And when she gave one of the first keynote speeches, it was such a powerful experience for me that I walked away saying, I need to be in the presence of this person and I need to learn from this person. And then the next day, Pema Chodron, who some of you may recognize that name, this iconic figure in the world of meditation and engaged Buddhism, gave a keynote. And Reverend Angel engaged Pema Chodron so beautifully as she was talking about holding anger. And Reverend Angel really helped the whole audience to engage this conversation about making sure we understand when anger is justified, when it's really very logical, and how it can be used to catalyze change, in particular among disenfranchised communities, people of color, etc. And after that experience, I said again, I need to be in the presence of this person. I need to learn from this person. I think Reverend Angel brings three things that are so unique. Number one, this deep and abiding commitment to the strategies and the frameworks of mindfulness and helping people to see the power of returning to ourselves again and again with grace, with compassion, with kindness, and therefore being able to bring ourselves to the world in that way as well. And then number two, she sort of combines that with this absolute fierce commitment to fighting injustice, to working toward racial justice, racial healing, collective liberation, etc., and brings those two together. And number three, I think she brings an intellectual rigor and sort of theoretical sophistication to this work that, let's face it, is appealing to those of us working in the academy, right? Working in higher education. So, to just say a few more things about Reverend Angel's work and background. Reverend Angel Kyodo Williams is an author, an activist, a master trainer, and founder of Transformative Change. She has been bridging the worlds of transformation and justice since her critically acclaimed book, Being Black, Zen and the Art of Living with Fearlessness and Grace, was hailed as an act of love by Pulitzer Prize winner Alice Walker, and it was hailed as a classic by Buddhist pioneer Jack Kornfield. These days, almost all of her time is devoted to advancing the work ignited by her co-authored book. Here it is, Radical Dharma, Talking Race, Love, and Liberation, to have the conversations necessary to become more awake and aware of what hinders liberation of self and society. The connections, circles, and conversations that have emerged from radical Dharma confront head-on the most formidable and critical impediment to justice and social transformation of our time. They've initiated profound healing and deepened commitment to dismantling oppression across lines of race, class, sexual orientation, and other divides. Her work has been widely covered by publications such as the New York Times, the Boston Globe, Ms., Essence, Buddha Dharma, and On Being with Krista Tippett. Reverend Angel happily splits time between Oakland, California, and Brooklyn, New York, with her partner Elena and African gray parrot friend Mitra. Welcome, Reverend Angel. So nice to have you.
Thank you so much, Beth, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm gonna make a little bit of adjustment on my screen so I can get as many faces in here as possible. I love that Zoom, I don't know, we have this thing now with Zoom where you can move people around. And so I'm gonna get a little shuffle and bring faces right where I can see them. It's really my honor to be here. And I was speaking to the organizers just as I was coming on, to Julie and Anne and Beth is particularly saying that, this is actually the first thing I think that I've done publicly all month. And the only reason that I agreed to do it is because I have made this decision that the things that I would do during February would really be for the upliftment of Black folks and for centers and institutions that are supporting Black peoples. There are many of the months that we could do lots of other things, but it felt really critically important. And for those of you that don't know, this was originally supposed to be in person last year around this time. And as we all know, we've all been put in a little bit of a timeout by the universe and by the conditions of coronavirus. And I've said to people that I think of it as a kind of a forced retreat, which seems really appropriate to where we are in this trajectory in history. I don't know about you, but I have had the experience of being in a relationship with people, and you learn new things, and you know that it's time to grow and it's time to shift in your relationship, but it's very difficult to really take the new things that you're learning and that it's clear to you, this is my growth edge and I've got to implement this in my relationship. But it's kind of difficult to do in that same relationship because there's a momentum to the relationship as it exists. And I feel like that expresses the truth of the state of the Black diaspora to the United States in particular, to North America, and by extension of the way in which we have such an outsized impact on the world to the world. that the relationship that the world, by way of the United States and its a policy and the predicament of its inception of having enslaved Black peoples in the Black diaspora, has got to retool its relationship with the Black diaspora. It's known, we've been knowing that we've been grappling with that, but the force of momentum of history, the force of momentum of the habit that we have of relating to the Black diaspora, the force of habit that we have had in terms of how we have related to Black peoples, to Indigenous peoples, to people of colors, to immigrant peoples, to peoples of, we talk about Muslim people particularly, right? But in the United States, in the North America in particular, all of those are racialized conversations. We act as if they're conversations about religion, even when they're about race. We're not thinking about white-bodied Muslim people when we think about like the animosity and anti-Muslim sentiment and anti-Islamophobia the Islamophobia that exists, right? These are racialized conversations, and again, they're about the Black diaspora and the relationship that has been seeded in this country of an extractive and as simultaneously like extractive, like so pull close and hold on to Black peoples and peoples in the diaspora, and simultaneously a distancing relationship that keeps a sense of belonging of Black peoples, but also of peoples amongst each other, right? That peoples that along the spectrum in relationship in the Black diaspora, but peoples in relationship to Black peoples have all been kept from belonging to each other. And so we have this broken, frayed relationship in terms of our sense of belonging to ourselves and amongst each other as a result of the history that has been created and the conditions that have been created by this country. And the laws, right? And many people can say, and I'm sure that many of you are scholars in your own right, of the relationship that this exists throughout the world, but the United States has created a very particularly unique set of circumstances by codifying and racialization and baking it into the institutions that exist. And so we have this very, very unique role in terms of the shaping of the relationship that we have to Black peoples and to peoples of the Black diaspora, and by extension, therefore, all people in bodies of color, all people that are Indigenous, right? It all extends out from the relationship that we have with Black peoples in this country. And so that relationship, and as we know, we're in 401 years, right? In 2020, like 400 years, it feels like a kind of good time to make a little bit of turn and shift in that relationship. And I was thinking about that, as in 2019, like I actually committed for the first time to have, most of the things that I talked about actually centered in the conversation about that 400 years of at least as we understand it, of the enslavement of Black peoples in the United States. It was important to highlight it, and it was important to highlight it just not just so that people could be aware, but so that we could begin the shift. And so we get through, almost through, all of 2019. And maybe that would have been time, I started to call 2020 before it came along year one, right? Year one, as in like, this is the year to begin the shift. And little did I know that we would have the pandemic come. And out of the many things that we know that has happened as a result of the pandemic, one thing that has really sat with me throughout this time is this notion of like, oh, for all the pain, for all of the terrorizing, we had the pandemic, we had George Floyd's murder, and we had the Black Lives Matter movement, the kind of like this emergence, this sort of like emergence in our consciousness that like, and no place to run because of the pandemic, no place to distract ourselves with, we're confronted with the truth of the state of our relationship to peoples of the Black diaspora, to people that inhabit Black bodies. And the conditions of the pandemic meant that we couldn't go anywhere. I've said many times that I don't think we would have seen the kind of uprisings that we saw had we not had the pandemic. We would have seen some protests. We would have seen some response. We would have seen some pushback. But I don't think we would have seen the rise, because we needed the time for integration that comes from retreat. For those of us that have had a practice or begun to unfold a practice of turning our attention inward and paying attention to our internal lives, we know that these things don't happen in a moment. They're not like these sort of sudden sparks. It's an emergence of recognition of what is happening inside of us that then we have to take action on. And that's what it felt like for me, is like this emergence. We had this incident that is actually a reflection of a long history, right? The murder of George Floyd was a moment that was actually a mirror that turned itself back around on this 400-year history. This unfolding that has been happening and holding the recognition of how not enough our responses have been, right? How insufficient our ability to grapple, to navigate, to integrate, to even accept the state of racialization in America and how it has been. So the pandemic, having like literally like situated us in a kind of timeout, forced many of us, and I even think had it happened sooner, right, when we were still trying to like make our way through all of the Netflix shows we possibly could, it wouldn't have grabbed our attention as much, right? In some ways, it was a perfect storm of awareness, of confrontation, so that in an embodied way, we had to navigate like this is enough, and that we can't abide by it anymore. That for so many people, and you can just do your own internal reflection. For so many people, what was once and maybe something that we held with a sense of like, oh, this again, or the deep pain, and it's kind of too much and I can't quite take it anymore. I've heard many people say like I couldn't even watch it. We had just enough time to be confronted, right, with our inability to tolerate these conditions anymore. And that's what happens in our inner journey for anybody that moves through their inner journey. You have your stuff, you have your things that you're trying to negotiate. And there becomes a point where you're up against yourself, you're up against the truth of what is not working anymore. And one has to say, like, I cannot tolerate this. It creates an intolerable reality. And I feel like as a collective, we were confronted with this and obviously not everyone, right? Not true for everyone, not holding in everyone's attention in the same way, but for some moment in time, in a way that has never happened, I think, really in this country ever before. No matter where you were on the spectrum of your understanding and your relationship about race, you were confronted with it. And all at the same time. And you may have been confronted with a way that was like, get this stuff out of my face. I don't want to deal with it. But we all had to we were all confronted with it. And we were all confronted with a level of intolerability of it, even if it was like, I just want this to go away and I want people to stop talking about it. We were all confronted with it. And this is the path. This is the path to a true awakening for any system, whether it's an individual system or a collective system. When we get to a point in which it is no longer tolerable for us to continue to abide by the situation as it is, and something has to change, something has to give. This is so important because part of how the conditions that have allowed for a continued state of the diminishment of people based on the color of the skin, based on race, based on perceived on religion, based on their gender, based on their sexual orientation, based on their gender, their how they present in terms of their gender, all of these things. One of the great, I want to say, skills, if you will, and that's a kind of funny word for what I'm going to say, but the skills or genius in this country has been creating conditions in which people allow intolerable things to be tolerated. We're almost masterful at it, right? A kind of like shifting and moving people around and pitting people against their own sense of belonging and their right to exist and continue to be a part of the whole. For the sake of that, for the sake of continuing to be a part of the whole, our national creed has created conditions in which we will tolerate intolerable things. And we've tolerated the intolerable reality of genocide, right, against the Indigenous and First Nations peoples here. We've tolerated the intolerable reality of the enslavement of Black peoples. We've tolerated the intolerable reality of like a continuous rotation of demonizing peoples that come from non-European countries in particular, right? It started with European countries, the Irish in particular, right? But a continuous like rotation of creating enemies out of peoples as they arrived at these shores so that we could diminish them in some way, devalue them in some way, to push them off into the corners of society so that they could be capitalized upon, right? So that they could be capitalized upon. So that, because when people are devalued, right, when they're undervalued, and then we can capitalize upon them. And so now you can see how these various systems are playing with each other, in which racialization, in which oppression in its many forms go part and parcel with capitalism, right? And the impulse towards creating a vast amount of wealth and power and situating in the hands of a relatively few number of people, while getting a mass number of people to participate in maintaining that system. It's kind of genius if you think about it. And because it's so genius, right, because there's such a force of momentum of hundreds of years of it, right? Hundreds of years that are situated actually in hundreds of years before where it was perfected in Europe, before it even got to these shores. Thousands of years, if you will, if you're talking about gender, in the ways in which it's perfected in the form of patriarchy and misogyny, and ways in which women were diminished and capitalized upon, in ways in which wealth was built upon the backs of women's dowries and their lack of power. So I love that we're like heading into Women's History Month, because these conversations always dovetail together. And so we have the system that has like this great momentum to it, thousands of years, hundreds of years off of these shores, hundreds of years within these shores, you know, and on and on. And then here comes this pandemic and it goes, stop. And so we're still, and we're brought to pause. And then inside of that pause, inside of that, and this neuroscientist that I'm quite fond of uses this word, I love it, the inside of this quiescence, right? The quiet that created by the conditions of the pandemic, just the right moment where we're sort of like frenzied and we're saying like, oh, okay, like this thing, it's gonna pass. We can just we can just like wait for it to pass. Okay, it's not passing. Our government isn't doing anything. Our president isn't doing anything. They don't know how to deal with this thing. Okay, it'll pass. It'll pass in 1 month. It'll pass in 2 months. It'll pass in 3. Not passing. And right there, in perfect order with natural human cycles of when it is we actually start to accept things, it's about 3 months. We actually start to accept new realities. So right there at about 3 months, we get this experience of having to bear witness in whatever ways, this confrontation with the state of our relationship with the Black body in America. And we can't escape it. We can't escape it. We can't busy it away. We can't disappear it. We can't just like go and get in our cars and buy more stuff and just, right? We're in this suspended state in which the confrontation becomes something that we are literally or have to like live with. We have to like be with it in this profound way that as I watched it, it was like, oh, this is exactly how the state of awakening in individual people, we get to this place where the intolerable conditions, we're confronted with it when we create conditions of stillness. We create conditions of stillness, we create conditions of quiescence, and it brings about this confrontation with the stuff that we're doing in our lives that's no longer working. The stuff that we can't abide by anymore, the stuff that we can't tolerate. And it's brought to the fore, and something has to happen. And at first we try to deny it. And so like some people come out and they go, enough. And there's some of us that's like, well, I'm not sure, maybe they did something wrong. But time passes and the energy is rising, and we begin to feel it, not just as individuals, not just as those people having a problem over there. And we saw it come out and roll out into the streets. We saw the response of the collective body say, this is intolerable. We cannot stand this anymore. In waves, as people, right, joined, we thought, oh, it'll go away. It's just those people there. They're going to protest. It's just those people in those cities on the coast because they're like that and they're going to protest. And then slowly, no, cities that there were hardly any Black people at all. Any Black people at all. You know what they were doing? They were claiming, people were reclaiming their sense of belonging to a collective body and saying that this body cannot tolerate this anymore, that this is no longer about the Black body, that this is no longer about the Black diasporic body. This is about the collective body and the ways that we have recognized that belonging to each other, to ourselves, has been taken away from us by way of the momentum of this forced tolerating the intolerable. And we're not going to take it anymore. And so we come forward in the same way that we do in our inner lives, in our journey, and we say, this place that I am in which my comfort was more important than the unknown, is no longer tolerable. And so I'm willing to enter into the unknown. I'm willing to enter into the unknown for the sake of coming to know myself more fully, coming to know myself more completely. We are literally participated in the journey of awakening as a collective, the same journey that happens in individuals when they undertake the journey into their inner lives. The confrontation with our own inner lives that says, these ways that I have been inhabiting, this place of fear that I've been situated, this place of comfort with the unknown, and I know it is not right. I know it's intolerable. I know it's not working for me. But it's so familiar, and it's so much more therefore comforting, even when it's wrong, even when it's not working. It's so much more comforting than going into the unknown. That's what the awakening journey, that's what the inner life journey is about. When we get to the place where we say we can no longer abide here, and we're willing to confront the unknown, we're willing to go past our comfort zone into the place of unknown, for the sake of knowing more wholeness. So we do it for ourselves individually, for the sake of knowing more wholeness. But what we did for the first time is that we did it collectively. We said, we're going to go into the unknown. We're going to pour out into the streets. We're going to protest from behind our masks or whatever. We're going to stay glued to the television and see what's happening here, or to the internet. We don't have no television anymore. I don't know. To the internet and see what's happening here. And we're going to go into the unknown of this territory that the history of race and the momentum of the enslavements of Black peoples and the Black diaspora has kept us from entering into this space of the unknown, because it was made to be more comfortable to stay here, disconnected from each other, disconnected from our own truths, disconnected from the part of myself that says I cannot tolerate the intolerable. And that is a collective seizing of our power. That is a collective seizing of our power that is akin to what it is that we do for ourselves when we choose our inner lives and a willingness to discover our own truth and extend beyond the boundaries placed on us by our families, by our gender roles, by the expectations that are imposed upon us, by the inheritance of social conditioning that tells us like who we can be, who we can't be, who we can love, who we cannot love. And when we choose to actually know our own truth, what we're choosing is to say, I actually have to choose to belong to myself once again. I have to choose wholeness, right? Over this externalized idea of belonging that is keeping me small, that is keeping me limited, that is keeping me from loving and connecting with others and keeping me therefore from loving and connecting with myself. Because there's no such thing as an intolerable thing that we tolerate that is not about essentially a brokenness within ourselves, a disconnect within ourselves. We don't tolerate the intolerable unless we are disconnected from ourselves. And so we have this simultaneous inner journey and external journey that now it is upon us to connect back together and say, this thing that happened out there. So first we frame it, this thing, there is a thing and it happened. And we can't allow the masterful capacity of somehow the culture of this nation to redistribute us and separate us and make us feel like a personal or an individual thing happened. What happened was a collective thing. And when we go back into our own corners and we think like, oh, you know, we're going to go through this and something will have happened and I'll get a vaccination and we'll go back to business as usual. We'll be tricked into thinking that we had individual journeys, and we didn't. We had a collective journey that is incumbent upon us to discover our singular truth within and make the connection so that we can carry forward and make sure that we never go back to business as usual, and make sure so that we never let the clock get turned back, and make sure that we understand what happened to us collectively as something that was necessary for us to experience, not as individuals, but as a collective, for us to shift the momentum of history. That this is the time. And that if we fall asleep, as you can, even on your awakening journey, if we fall asleep, we will be tricked into believing that what happened was about individual people in their homes that had an experience, and they faced a pandemic, or they witnessed an uprising, or they had a feeling about what was happening, and then it just goes dormant again. And we won an election, maybe, I don't know where you are standing, but for me it was winning. We won an election and now we can just go back to business as usual. This is our moment to, I like to say, to stick our finger in the aperture and turn it open so we stay wide awake. So we understand our place in the moment, in this history and in this arc, that this experience of being in a moment of quietude together, in a moment of witnessing ourselves, in a moment of saying, this is intolerable, I will not tolerate the intolerable anymore, is something that can be an incident that happened that we go forward, or it can become the practice that allows us to reshape our institutions, to reshape our families, to reshape our communities, to reshape the country that we live in. But it is up to us to do it. And if we're not able to situate ourselves in the larger picture and understanding of a collective awakening, then we will go to sleep. And my hope is that for every single one of us here, that it will become intolerable, that the idea of going to sleep and going back to business as usual will become intolerable, and that we will no longer tolerate the intolerable. That being disconnected, that this weird thing of like all of us being in little boxes, you know, shaped out like the Brady Bunch or Hollywood Squares, take your pick. This disconnection from being, you know, from feeling each other and being in rooms together and being in with bodies in all of our different shapes and races and colors and smells and orientations and classes and all of that, that we'll feel the loss of that. And we will no longer be able to tolerate disconnect amongst ourselves. That the sense of being situated to be hyper individualized will be felt, right? That we'll feel this sense of like, wow, this really, I mean, it's lovely to have like glimpses into people's own like homes, and we're all literally coming together from our own homes together, but that we'll miss the sense of connection to humanness that is the signal of our collective belonging that the history of this country has kept us from. And that we'll demand it. We'll no longer be able to abide by the disconnect that has been part of this culture, and that we will insist for ourselves that we have a right to belong to each other, that we have a right to belong to ourselves, and that it is our individual specific personal practice that is going to reclaim that belonging to each other and to ourselves. I think I'll pause there. And thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. So I'll turn everything over to Joelle Daly. She's been monitoring the chat and we see questions. Go ahead, Joelle.
Yeah, excuse me. Hello, everyone. That was a lovely talk, Reverend Angel. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are 3 questions that popped up. One of the most recent says, have you thought about permanently leaving America? I know some Black folks cannot tolerate the intolerable in America and decide to move out of the country. I know racism is everywhere, but do you ever just want to leave?
All the time. I feel like I have like literally like one foot in Amsterdam all the time. I'm like, can we travel yet? Can we go yet? Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, to your point, you know, do I ever, it's like, yes, racism everywhere, but it's kind of not mine. You know, there's this way that it feels like there's a very specific brand that's here in the States and here in North America that feels different and lands on my body different, but it lands on my body different while it continues to land on the body of the people that I love. And so I feel still, I don't know how long I will, but I still feel the commitment to lightening the load of the burden that on the bodies of my brothers and my sisters and my kin. Black bodies, brown bodies, indigenous bodies, white bodies, actually. So yes, all the time, all the time. I have my passport stays like an arm's distance away from me. And as long as we love, I think we still feel the tension, right? I think as long as we love and we are aware, feel aware of, you know, there will be a tension of if we feel we have something to contribute, and maybe that's what makes it a little bit different for me. If we feel like we have something to contribute that might actually change it, I think that we'll always feel the tension of like, but I have to give it a try.
Well, there is, Craig just asked the question, how does Zen practice help you understand and manage your reaction to racial injustice?
You know, I think that Zen practice situates itself for me. Yeah, at the this very fine line between navigating what they call in Zen, and they, you know, it's cross Buddhism, but they really lift it up in Zen, that the notion of the relative and the absolute, right? And that there's a relative reality and there's an absolute reality. And the absolute reality is that, you know, we're all one, you know, race doesn't really exist, right? And that, you know, human beings are human beings, and, you know, and everybody's, you know, trying to do the best they can. And the relative reality is that the force of racialization, the burden of it lands on Black bodies in very particular ways. It lands on people of color's bodies in, you know, very particular ways. And so navigating that without losing myself in either one of them, where I'm not like just raging in the way in which it lands on Black bodies and the confrontation with that, and neither am I, and not disappearing into, you know, kumbaya land of like, well, you know, we're all really, you know, just one peoples. So I think that it has given me that language and the ability to navigate the dynamic tension. And what's important about that is that I am both committed to the liberation of all peoples, and I'm not waiting for anyone else to be free for me to be free. And I'm not waiting for the system to repair itself before I can declare myself and commit myself to my liberated stance, right? And if I was so encumbered by the relative reality, if I allowed myself without my spiritual practice and without my spiritual view to be, I would simply be overwhelmed by the relative conditions that exist and are confronted by my body and by the bodies of the people that I love on a daily basis. And in many ways, Zen and practice and all of the practices that I have give me a lens out, like they give me a kind of portal out to turn around and look back on it so that I can be in it, but not of it, which is another really good saying, right? I could be in it and not of it. So I can critique it without being overwhelmed by it, right? And I think that that's really important. And that actually relates to the question about leaving. One of the things that I think is important about leaving and being able to leave, even if you leave for a short period of time, is actually like stepping out of it frees you up to be able to look at the whole of race and the reality of race and racialization and oppression in America without it's sitting on you. And that actually is a very, very important view to have. And if you think about it, most of our most formidable writers and interrogators of race in America have left America for meaningful periods of time, right? From James Baldwin to Angela Davis to, I mean, everybody, like they leave. And it's important because when it's really hard to understand and get a grasp of like how much you are swimming in the waters of it, even when you're trying to critique it. So you kind of like, you have to get out of the water and stand on the side of it to know how much you're really pulled into it. I'll tell you a story really quickly. I went and actually people tend to talk about James Baldwin. Someone mentioned Baldwin being in France, but actually James Baldwin spent about 11 years in Istanbul. And I went and I spent time in Istanbul. And I remember being there for my first, like, you know, a little bit more, being more than a week at a time. I think I was there for like over a month or something. And someone was saying something to me or not respond, you know, he was not responding to me. And my first impulse, right, was that it was about race. But as the conversation unfolded, I realized it wasn't about race at all. It might have been about gender, but it wasn't about race at all. But that was the only place that I had to pull from in terms of the response that I was getting. And so I had to like expand my palette about human interaction and what things humans were doing and what kinds of interactions we could have and what we could even conflict over, because everything didn't have to be about race anymore outside of America, which race is always operating always operating. It's not necessarily everything that's operating, but it's always operating. And just being freed of that view gave me a lot more sensitivity to the varying levels of conflict and engagement with people that I have when I am inside of the States. It's contributed enormously. So relative and absolute, and the ability to get a lens that is outside, both physically and also both spiritually and also physically, have been enormously helpful to me.
And muted. I also thank you for that response, and it almost makes sense to ask this follow-up question, which is, what are you most hopeful about, and what are you most concerned about in the current time regarding our collective racial healing?
Mm-hmm. I'm most hopeful about just what I shared, that we are in this, that we have had this quiescence, that we have time to sort of stew in our own, stuff and grapple. I think the level of attention that we have had, at least as evidenced by the number of people that are asking me, this was not like everybody's favorite topic 5 minutes ago, right? And so the number of people and the diversity of people and institutions that are actively confronting conversations about race. I got some email and it was like Crate and Barrel, it wasn't even February yet. And Crate and Barrel was like, yeah, we're going to make sure that we have this many Black people, hired, and this many Black people that we're ordering our retail products from, and this many. And I was like, yeah, like that, right? This time has fomented a real reflection on like what real change, right? And if it hadn't lasted as long, right, we just would have done a little thing. We would have like put on our Black Instagram things and then went on our business again, we would have like done a little nod and then back to business as usual. So this sustained. I'm very hopeful about this. Simultaneously, I'm most concerned that that particularly the fact of having our first Black and South Asian vice president and woman and all of those things will make people go to sleep, and we'll be like, oh, we've done it. I'm most concerned about business as usual. I'm most concerned about passing the buck and thinking that somehow there's someone out there that is going to take care of it, and there's no one out there. There's no one out there that's going to take care of it. We can come together collectively and we can move some things, but it requires every single one of us to do a very, very deep dive, an honest dive, with integrity, a courageous dive into the ways in which we are fomenters of, it's sort of like, I'm hopeful that our brains are not like full 24 hours a day of what some, orange hothead in the president's office is doing, so that we can't pay attention to how we are contributing, how we are complicit to systems and forces of oppression, so that we have enough breath and space to turn around and look at ourselves and go, yeah, but what about me? And it's hard to go, what about me, when, somebody's taking up all the air in the room, right? You can't turn around and just like breathe with yourself and say, what about me? And how am I contributing? How am I contributing to oppression? How have internalized oppression? How am I a gatekeeper if I'm Black or brown? How have I been caught up in this? And we're all caught up, right? That's the way it was designed. We are all caught up in some way. And so I am hopeful that we have the space, we have some space to actually look at how we're all caught up. I'm concerned that it becomes too easy to think that because we've had some small respite, right, including the respite of the potential vaccination, that we'll go back to business as usual.
Yes. These are all such great responses. And I apologize to everyone who's posing questions. I'll try to get to as many as we can with the time that we have. One in particular is, how do we as Black people navigate racial trauma?
Yeah, I think we first and foremost that we recognize that it's not ours. It is not ours individually, right? That that the trauma that lives on us is collective, that it's not our fault, and that those structures of this society, this culture, situates us in a position which we're always coming back to somehow it's our fault, right? Our individual rights are both stolen away and then also imposed upon us, right? It's like Black folks can never be really truly individuals. We're always a representative of our race. We're always sort of like carrying the wholeness of our race, but simultaneously, we dare not turn around and say like this thing is happening to us because we're Black, right? We can't do that. So we can never we get all of the the negatives of what it means to be a part of like the one big collective, like Black people are doing this or Black people doing that, and that's okay, but we can't ever receive the benefits of that by way of analysis of like, yes, there is a reason that Black folks are more prone to getting coronavirus, and it has nothing to do with the fact that something's wrong with us individually. So we have to really situate ourselves in an awareness that we have always been and always are part of a collective, and that we are personally responsible for ourselves in terms of being the champions of our healing, because no one else is going to do it for us.
It's interesting that you brought up the concept of healing, because the next question is, how do we flow between me and we?
Yeah.
When you speak of the collective.
Yeah. I hold a sense that there are many traditions and spiritual traditions that really encourage people to like connect with others, and we often talk about empathy and talk about compassion. And I think that the structure, the design of this culture demands that actually we find our relationship to we actually by fully reclaiming and reconnecting to the me, right? To really fully connect and reclaim a wholeness with ourselves that has been obfuscated by various conditions, various social conditions, various inhibitions, sense of limitations that come about as a result of being a part of this culture. And so to have, I actually have a practice in particular that I've developed, and I call it a point practice. And the pith of it is a point meditation. And in the point meditation, the encouragement is to choose a point, right? And that point is literally the core of our being, in our own belly, about 3 inches below our navel and behind our navel. And it's the breath as it rests there. So the breath rests right there in the belly, and the breath, moves throughout our body. We sort of feel the pressure of our breath, but to recognize the way that the breath can abide there. And that's our point, and everything else is other than point. So we bring our attention awareness to point, and everything else is other than point. The reason that is because I'm trying to, in developing the practice, I was trying to develop a way for people to develop profound fundamental trust in oneself. And the only way you can develop profound fundamental trust in oneself is actually to be able to tolerate yourself, and to be able to tolerate all of what it means to be with yourself. And you can't be with yourself if you don't come back to yourself, if you're always like, distracted by other things, and that your attention is out here and elsewhere. So we develop the muscle of returning to ourselves over and over again, confronting all of the stuff that we feel about ourselves, the sense of inadequacy, lack of self-worth, the value judgments that we have about ourselves, the information we got to other people, the ways that we perform, the ways that we mask, the ways that we leave us in ourselves and escape ourselves, and come into a sense of being willing and able to return to ourselves over and over again, which develops trust in ourselves. And when we're able to fundamentally trust in ourselves, then we can actually then we actually directly experience how we are the we as a result of that trust in ourselves. When the we is something other than us, there will always be tension. But when we come to we, directly through the experience of like, oh, I am this, and I am everything. That I'm of you, that I am fully not related to you in this, like, you know, you're just like out there somewhere, but I feel the connection to you. Then that profound trust extends into being a part of everyone else. So it's I think this then the specific question of like, how do I flow, right? There's a permeability that allows me to inhabit both of them at the same time. And then it's more about, in any given moment, where am I placing my energy that's appropriate in this moment, right? Do I relax down into the collective we, right? Or is this a moment where I need to like stand in the needs and aspirations of me?
Great. Thank you. In responding to that, someone asked the question, do you have any writings that express what you've just shared?
Which one?
I was going to.
There's lots of things. So this weekend, on Saturday, I every month I do, and I started this during the pandemic because I was like, yeah, people really need a way to come back to themselves. And I started these half-day sits. And so we have a half-day sit that happens this Saturday. And we have that practice. And when you're part of that, we share that point practice. So that's one thing, a way to, that's one kind of, I don't know if it's a writing, it's a video. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. I mean, you could just, you know, Google, there's like so many things, kind of is a little bit mad, but my website, you know, is certainly a place to start so that you can find it. And I just feel like I have talked and, you know, in so many places. There is I want to say, there was an embodied social justice summit that I did about 2 weeks ago. And I was talking about the importance of one having one's own practice, and I highly recommend that talk as a starting place. It's kind of fierce, and so you might want to, you know, tie your skirt on because it might blow it up. But it really leans into this conversation about how important it is for us to be in relationship and profound trust with ourselves.
Wonderful. I would have liked to get to everyone's questions. We're abutting 6:57, and I wanted to bring Dr. Moody Freeman back in because I know she probably wants to say a few words.
Yes.
Yeah, may I say one thing really quickly? Because this question comes up so often, and I just saw it really quickly. How do we express what is intolerable? People still haven't found that collective moment with us. I want to say this is really important because a lot of us, you know, we're big-hearted, and the place that we often go is like, how do I like get to that person way over there? And we want to just bridge the largest divides. And I just want to say that I'm coming from a place that this is not frontline work, right? Like, I'm not talking about frontline stuff. This is the long game. I'm trying to live in the space that's, you know, out there. How do we eradicate? We talk about our organization. How do we transform race in 12 and a half years? We believe that we can do it. Transform race as we know it. Doesn't mean we're going to change it, you know, entirely. Like, you know, there's always going to be discrimination and bias and so on. But how do we transform race as we know it in 12 and a half years? And what I want to say is start where there is love, right? Rather than trying to reach out to the furthest possible divides, right? To like let go and like let people be where they are, and you get in that fierce love and connection with yourself, and that is going to begin to give you a different position from which to have those conversations with those folks that are someplace else than you are situated right now.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Reverend Angel. I have two things in the chat for you. The first is, please donate to Transformative Change. I've put the link in there. And the second thing is, we have also put a link to a survey. So if you could please fill that out, it will take just a couple minutes for you to do that. Very little time. Thank you so much for being here and have a wonderful evening. Thank you. I love this. This was beautiful.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And I think you all can find, I have it's probably not on my website because I'm just a little bit, mad. I have a site called, and I haven't written it down, but it's called Zen Change Angel. And that site and Half Day Sit, if you just look up Half Day Sit and Reverend Angel, I'm sure Google will have followed me around enough to land you at the page. So if you want to join in and you don't have to spend the entire half day. There's like 4 hours and then we have a break and then there's another 4 hours. And we actually have a Black breakout this time in honor of Black History Month. So anybody that would like to join us, it is, no one is turned away. You can pay what you're able. There's a recommended amount, but you can pay, people have paid like $2. And so it doesn't have to stretch your pockets. And it's been surprisingly beautiful. I couldn't have imagined that you could have something like that on Zoom. It's pretty beautiful. It's called the Half Day Sit, and it is on Zen Change Angel. I'm gonna give me just 1 second, and I think I could actually pull a link up for you.
Very good.
Yeah, I think I can pull a link up and make it. Oh, I was like, why am I'm looking for the wrong thing? That's why. Spelling you'd think I know where it is. Okay, here it is. I'll put it in the chat. I think I have chat powers.
Oh.
Oh, sorry, that went to Ed by himself. Sorry about that, Ed. Okay. And I'll send it to everyone. There you go.
Oh, good.
Thank you for the lovely comments that are here. And for those of you that I didn't get to answer your question, I will ask that the organizers send them to me. I at least like to be with them and really hear. I learn from everyone else about what people are really thinking about, and I have appreciated the questions that are in there. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.